So good to see everybody. Turn with me to the book of Job. Quentin used to say the books of the Bible, and he'd get to Esther, and he'd say Esther, Job, how's it go? Prom's Suburbs. Esther, Job, Prom's Suburbs. Job chapter 1. For the next 7 weeks, I hope to go through Job, and hope to challenge you to read it as a church together over the next month or so. And I start by asking, have you considered my servant Job? Part 1, the prologue, prosecutors and the possibility of love. All right? Let's read from Job chapter 1 and verse 1 beginning here. In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. The man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 5,000 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to take turns holding feasts in their homes, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. Isn't that great? Kids that get along. Kids that want to have a party together. And when a period of feasting had run its course, Job would send and have them purified. Early in the morning he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. And one day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and the Satan, there's an article there, the Satan, the prosecutor, the court prosecutor, okay? The heavenly temple courts have a DA. The district attorney, the accuser, also came with them, and the Lord said to the Satan, "Where have you come from?" And Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it." And then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on earth like him. He's blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." You're going to hear that over and over again, right? Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? Have you blessed his work? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to accuser, "Very well then, everything he has is in your hands. But on the man himself, do not lay a finger." And then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, And I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from the sky and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they're dead. And I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. On another day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before God. And the Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? And Satan answered the Lord, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it. Right? And then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? Oh, now he's rubbing it in. Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil, and he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. Skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, very well then, he's in your hands, but you must spare his life. And so Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. And then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, are you still holding to your integrity? Curse God and die. And he replied, you're talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. Yeah. Have you considered my servant Job? The prologue of Job asks us to engage in an act of imagination. An act of imagination. Imagine the Satan before Satan became a proper name for the angel, the devil. Imagine the Satan, the angelic prosecutor or the court accuser going rogue on God. Imagine a world where this rogue prosecutor appears in the heavenly court and resents the sovereignty of Yahweh, the God King, who has been, this prosecutor has been roaming the earth, going back and forth, finding crimes to accuse God's loved ones of committing. I don't know, but I kind of sense in my reading of this that he goes to and fro throughout the earth to accuse God's family and to bring disrepute on the sovereignty of God because of the character of the people God loves. Be invited then, imagine that God is especially proud of His servant Job. Have you considered my servant Job? It sounds to me like God's a proud parent who, when He finds out the prosecutor has been visiting, wants to know if he's met his special child. Job is certainly dear to the heart of God. And so we're imagining here, and this is, I think, critical for our understanding of the whole book, right? We're imagining a story where the creature God is especially proud of and loves is the one that is being afflicted. And that God is Himself afflicted because God is so proud of Job. You get it? My servant Job, you see, stands in relation to my servant Moses, or my servant David. Caleb gets mentioned as my servant only once. But Job, my servant Job, is lumped in with Moses and with David in the Bible. He is God's special servant whom He calls His own. In Numbers 12 and verses 7 and 8, God says, my servant Moses is different from other prophets in that he and I speak together mouth to mouth. The NIV renders it face to face. The audience with God that Moses knew is something we'll see that Job demands and that God grants. Job and God will speak mouth to mouth, face to face. And so, in biblical history, God's investment in Job is a great big deal. In fact, Job is the only other book, other than the books of the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, that is recorded and preserved in an antique, old Paleo version of Hebrew. Job goes right back to the very heart of the canon. Job, this is a big deal. God calls my servant. However, typically God's servants get unfairly accused of things. Numbers 12:8, speaking of my servant Moses again, God goes on and says, you speak with Moses. I speak with Moses mouth to mouth, face to face. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And as we're going to see, Job is in for quite a few accusations, not just the ones that we've heard here in the prologue. Imagine then God loving the greatest man of the East. Imagine that Job is utterly blameless. 1:1, 1:8, 2:3, God says it over and over again. Job's blameless. His blamelessness doesn't mean absolute flawlessness. Job's blamelessness in chapter 31 and verse 33 is that Job has not hidden his sin for fear of being embarrassed. Rather, he's confessed it and sought reconciliation. Blamelessness in this sense is covenant loyalty, where Job is honestly trying his best, and his best actually is spectacular. His best actually stretches the imagination. And even when he does mess up, he's open about it. Job, in other words, has integrity. He's true to himself before God. He won't give a false pretense. He trusts his relation with God. And he has this relation with God, and he will not renounce it. And so it's no surprise that a person who keeps on trying to do the right thing and the best thing ends up quite blessed. Generally, that's what happens, right? The story is from a different culture and wants us to imagine an extreme picture of blessedness. I don't know if any of you think having 10 kids is the perfect picture of blessedness or not. But the ancients probably did. He has the perfect number of sons. He's got 7 sons, 3 girls to boot, and they all love each other, and they all like to spend time together. Now think about this one. Compared to Israel, Job's family is spectacularly better off. Israel's kids hate each other. Jacob's kids, they don't get along. Jacob's kids are far from blameless, and so on and so forth. And so what the book of Job is trying to get even Jewish people to consider is just how profoundly blessed is this family. The story asks us to imagine that Job is not a Jew, so that the special covenantal promises of blessing do not apply. He doesn't live in the land of promise, so the special provision over the land which God has made the nation of Israel, descendants of Jacob, doesn't complicate this story. Imagine Job in the age of the patriarchs. Imagine a man of the East, probably someone like Abraham or some such person, perhaps from Padan Aram or somewhere else like it where believers in Yahweh exist. Uz is likely in the direction of Edom and somewhere in the east within the proximity of the Chaldeans at least. And the importance of this and the importance of this for our imagination and the story is that we're asked to imagine one person, Job, who stands as one person before God. Job's problems stand for all human beings before God. There are no questions about Job's ancestors and what they did to influence the situation. There are no special questions about special covenantal promises to ancestors about their descendants. Just one man, one woman before God. That's what we're talking about. You get it? It's a profound kind of theological move being made. Now, crucially, imagine this. The district attorney brings charges against even God's most cherished human. I mean, he loves all human beings, but he's especially proud of Job. What's the charge? Here it is. Does Job fear God for nothing? In other words, Job doesn't really love you. He's in it for the money. Job isn't a true soldier in your cause. He's a mercenary. Stop paying him in terms of wealth, in terms of children, in terms of reputation, and he'll curse you. And thus, from the perspective of heaven, what's at stake here in this story is something monumental. What's at stake is this. Is love really possible? Is love even really possible? Are human beings capable of real covenantal hesed? Can they be in relationship with God where they love God for who He is? Can they love one another for who they are? Or do human beings only love what others bring to their relationship? In other words, are human beings endlessly teenagers when the parent says no and the teenager says, I hate you? Is that it? In Luke 6 in verse 34, Jesus taught us, and if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend money to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But Jesus says, love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. If Jesus taught us to love this way, it's important for Job to demonstrate that that kind of love is even possible. Are you with me here? Yes, no, yeah, there we go, yeah. Jesus told us the parable of the lost coin. You remember the lost coin? The woman spends all day. I mean, she spends all kinds of time. I don't know what she makes an hour. But she works and works and works searching for this coin, right? Yes. Probably more than what the coin's worth. And then when she finds the coin, you know what she does? She throws a party that costs more than the coin could possibly have provided for. This woman is going nuts looking for a coin because she loves the coin, not what the coin can give her. It's the scandal of the parable. It's the scandal of the ages. And it's the issue of Job. Is that kind of love even possible? Right? Most of us don't really care anything about the coin. Right? When Quentin was a little boy, he got something in a birthday card, and the birthday card got thrown away with the gift, the money, the dollar that was still in it. And so we slipped him another dollar. And he said, I don't want that. I want that dollar, the dollar that was a gift, that I loved not the value, I loved the love. Yes? That's what's at stake in Job. Does Job fear God for nothing, the prosecutor says? He's just a mercenary. Job is just a mercenary. In other words, the parent doesn't really love the child. She just has the kid for the government money and the hope that the child will love and coo and give her affection back. Does the God of the Bible rejoice in the return of the prodigal or not? Does God's servants love? Do they love because they freely choose to, or do they love because there's some mutual benefit in it? That's the question. Now, it's time to admit that we don't necessarily like the story very much. For one, we modern Westerners don't like the question as it has been posed in heaven. We want an answer to the question of why bad things happen to good people. If you insist on having a definitive answer to that question, you're not going to like the book of Job very much. You're not going to get an answer to that question. Again, I'll put it another way. The question of Job is whether love is possible when there's nothing to gain. Can you love God when you no longer care about future blessings and no longer fear any future punishment? When the sticks and carrots are all dropped, is love still possible? Would you love God if there was no heaven and no hell? Do you love God for Himself, or are you looking for a get-out-of-jail-free card? Do you love God because He's true and loving and holy, or do you just want to escape? For most people today, that's not the question that they want to bring to Job. We want to know why God puts up with a rogue prosecutor to begin with. Are you with me? Why doesn't He just fire that stinking DA and get somebody that's nice? The picture of God in this story is one where God's able to set the parameters around evil, but He won't banish it. But you can't set a finger to Him. He's in your hands, but don't you dare touch Him. God shows Himself able to set the parameters in creation, but He seems to value relations even with rogue prosecutors. He loves, evidently, even this DA. God stays in relationship with an evil creation rather than just exterminating the evil. And we're never going to get told why. The God who hates evil doesn't exterminate evil creatures. He loves creation, even when creation doesn't cooperate. That's a fact and a choice that God is not going to argue or defend with us. And while we in Christ are led to believe that ultimately right will triumph, we live with the simple fact of wrong, and God remains deafeningly, right? He doesn't say anything about it. He's silent in self-defense here. Now further, let's think this through. We're asked in this story to imagine what all of us find frightful and horrible. The only way God can definitively prove that love is real and not mercenary is that all the blessings have to be stripped away from God's servant Job. We know that it's the prosecutor's will that's behind Job's suffering, but God accepts the responsibility for what happens too. He says the Satan has incited God against Job for no good reason. Chapter 2, verse 3. God then accepts responsibility for allowing the Satan to do what he does if suffering becomes so severe that death itself seems like a friend. If the hope of all blessing seems impossible, if reward and punishment are taken off the table, then we'll be able to tell if Job truly and freely loves God. We will be able to see if Job fears God because he loves God, or if he just likes to get paid or wants something in return from God. Yeah. Now, we experience this all the time in our families and in relations, you know. We thought somebody was a friend and realized that they weren't a friend. Because when the chips were down and it was costly for them, they abandoned us, right? They were much more like a customer in a store who's nice to the store owner as long as he wants something from the store owner. Yeah? Even after the loss of his children, Job, though, passes the test. Naked I came, naked I'll return. May the name of the Lord be praised. But Satan is not convinced. Skin for skin, he says. Job is clinging on to his own life, God. If his very existence is made so loathsome to him that he has nothing, absolutely nothing to live for, then he'll curse you, God. And so we receive the pathetic picture of Job afflicted by Satan with itching sores all over, him scraping himself with a broken piece of pottery shard as he sits among the ashes of his former life. And like most couples who lose children, Job has lost the relationship with his wife. We'll learn later that she hates Job's breath. Not that he has halitosis, but that she hates that he's alive, that he's still breathing. She foolishly says, "Why don't you just curse God and die?" I think she suspects that Job's virtue has something to do with what has befallen her family. We thus know more. We know far more than any of the characters of this story, save God. And the genius of the book of Job is that we get to hear the irony of what everybody is saying because we know something that they don't. We know something far more than Job knows. We know what this question is all about. We know that what is at stake is the whole purpose of God's creation in love. What's at stake is human freedom and human love. Job doesn't know that. Job's friends don't know that. And we won't know very much, and even in the end of the book, they won't know that. We know that because we have ascended into the heavenly council and we hear it. We hear what's truly at stake. And that causes us to imagine other situations like this. For instance, having lost her husband, a wife asks her oldest son to attend to more chores. Now, are you with me? Dad is killed. And what happens? Mom ends up leaning heavily on the oldest child. And the oldest child has to bear all kinds of burdens that the other children don't because of the necessity of the terrible situation. Yes? And it's not because the mother dislikes the oldest child and therefore wants to overburden the oldest child and complain about the other children to the oldest child. It's precisely because the mother actually loves the oldest child, is proud of the oldest child, that the oldest child gets the raw deal. Even when the other kids grow up and are as old as what the oldest child was when the death of the father happened, right? Those kids never get the level of responsibility that the oldest child always bears. Yes? Is it fair? Absolutely not. It's not fair when you consider how the children are treated differently. Is it unloving? Quite a different question, isn't it? You see, the question of heaven is different from the way it's being processed by the children on earth. Or we might consider it a different way. Another kind of example. I remember that there was a ministry context several years ago now where someone was not going to get the same privileges as the others did. There simply wasn't enough of the thing to go around. Someone was going to have to serve more sacrificially than others. So what did I do? I picked the person I thought I had the closest relationship with and who would have the maturity to handle the unfair treatment. The unfair treatment was in that sense a kind of compliment, an opportunity to bless the wider community and the ministry as a whole. You catch it? Is it unfair? Unjust? In a world of scarcity and fallenness, yes. Was it unloving? Different question. One family member I know was known for his hospitality, and the mother's hospitality especially, and often they would invite people to dinner unexpectedly when they might not have enough food for everybody. In such cases, the mother would offer in code to the kids all FHB, nonchalantly. FHB meant family hold back. Family hold back. Don't eat much because we want our guests to have all that they want. Is that fair? Well, of course not. Is it unloving? No, it's precisely loving, right? And I tell you these stories not because they're exactly equivalent to the Job story. I'm well aware that they differ in intensity, if not kind, compared to the story of Job. But they illustrate that sometimes a loving parent may treat one child unjustly compared to others in hopes of accomplishing a greater good. And the extra burdens asked of a servant or child or ministry partner, while unfair, are asked not because the parent or leader chooses to be an enemy or chooses to treat the sufferer without care, but the injustice occurs because it serves a greater good. It's in a messed up world, sometimes we're just unfairly asked to endure pain. Pain that we don't deserve in order to bless. And even though the treatment is unfair and at a profound level, the treatment is not motivated by malice or carelessness, right? That is what we're asked to imagine at the outset of Job. It's an astonishing coincidence that Psalm 22 was read this morning. Psalm 22, right, is a story about a messianic sufferer. The king has to suffer. Why is the king suffering? Why has God abandoned the king and his cause? We don't know. But we do know that God's got a cause and He's going to see it through. In Luke 22, in verse 31 and 32, Jesus tells Peter something. We catch just a glimpse of what's going on in heaven, though the narrative is on earth. In Luke 22 and verse 31, Jesus tells Peter, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. Peter has just told Jesus, you're not going to suffer like that. We're going to make sure that blessing comes about here, Jesus. And Jesus says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift your motivations like wheat. Here we are. We're going to see what the real wheat is. We're sifting it. And what Jesus doesn't say is, but I got your back, Peter. I'm not going to let Satan do it. Jesus says, and when this thing is all over, right, I want you to bless your brothers. Simon, I've prayed that your faith may not fail in the middle of this sifting. And when you've turned back, strengthen your brothers. Jesus, you see, is like this, like the messianic sufferer, like the suffering servant of God, right? In Isaiah 53. Who is unfairly mistreated, right? Over and over again. Unfairly accused on Calvary. Why? Is it because the Father doesn't love him? No. Jesus doesn't say, Peter, Satan is going to be kept at bay. He wants to prove that you are serving me for earthly gain. Peter, are you serving me for earthly gain and blessing or not? For from a certain point of view, it seems like you will abandon me if you learn that I'm not going to provide the blessings and the worldly victory that you envision. And so Satan has asked to sift your motives, and I know, like the triune God has always known, that my special servants will not fail in faith. And when you've come back from your disorientation and lapses, strengthen others. Peter's going to be persecuted. Peter is going to be crucified. Peter is going to be crucified upside down. But he will not forsake his love for Christ. And that alone, among all the witness, is extraordinarily compelling. When I was a young boy and I was thinking, do these claims, these Christian claims, make sense? The most compelling thing historically was that I knew that every last one of those guys that proclaimed Jesus crucified and risen and the Lord of heaven and earth went to their graves believing it. And why would they sign up for persecution and death when they knew it wasn't true? You see, what's at stake here, we may not ever know. We might not ever know. I'm not saying that when our children die, that God is doing some Jobin thing. I have no clue about that. I just know that when injustice happens, it doesn't mean that God doesn't love us. Yeah? And sometimes there's a kind of sifting of one's motives that goes on. When Abraham took Isaac up to the mount, right? Take that son whom you love, and offering him up. And Abraham obeys. And Abraham, like Job, proves in the binding of Isaac, right? That he loves God and he trusts God's goodness even when it costs him everything that he loves. That service to God is a love for God and for God's own self and not for what God can provide. And the book of Job is saying, yes, indeed, that is really possible. Not just for Job, but for all of us who serve Job's God as we stand and sing.